This is just the beginning.
Hello and welcome to an Axios virtual event, Biosimilars and the Future of Care. I'm Sam Baker, Senior Editor at Axios, coming to you today from Washington, D.C. I'd like to take a minute to thank Beatrice for making this conversation possible, and I'd like to welcome our audience on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, Axios.com. I hope you'll join the conversation today on Twitter using @Axios and hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I will be joined by my colleague Caitlin Owens to discuss the future of biosimilars and other innovative approaches to lowering the cost of treatment for patients in the US. Our first guest today is the representative of Oregon's 5th Congressional District, Congressman Curt Schrader. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
I appreciate the opportunity, Sam. Thank you.
So, I don't need to tell you, a lot of people had a lot of hopes for biosimilars when Congress first created that approval pathway back as part of Obamacare. It's a class of drugs, obviously, that had produced huge savings in Europe. People were hoping the same thing would happen here. It hasn't. We're left with a pretty stagnant, fledgling market here. That's a multifaceted problem, but let's start, because I think this is where you started, with the products that are on the market. I know you have a bill to give physicians a payment bump through Medicare to prescribe biosimilars when they have that option. Why do you think providers have not jumped at this more readily? Is it just the money, or do you think there are sort of other obstacles here that have held back even the products that you have?
Well, it's hard to say, Sam. For the viewers out there that don't know, biologics are basically the generic form of injectable medications you get at your doctor's office or at the hospital. It's not a pill. They're all familiar with generic tablets and that sort of thing, liquids that we can get. But biologics are oftentimes much more expensive. You go in for your cancer treatment or some sort of other very serious disease treatment. It usually is an IV line in your arm and some injectable medication. Those are very expensive, generally speaking. As Sam pointed out, you pointed out, Sam, that it's popular in Europe. The generic equivalent using those biosimilars makes a lot of sense. You save a lot of money as an individual, and frankly, for the system writ large. I'm not 100% sure that we're going to solve this entirely with the incentive payment, but sometimes, as we all know in real life, got to spend a little money to save a little money. And I think that's where we are with this, by increasing the reimbursement for some of the providers that provide these injectable medications. We're hoping that it catches their awareness and they get comfortable with it. I will tell you, as a veterinarian in my previous lifetime, I got comfortable with certain brand name drugs that were the first to come to the marketplace to treat a lot of the conditions I was dealing with in veterinary medicine. And you kind of get used to them and you don't want to change necessarily. It's working for you. So it takes a little push sometimes to get off of using the medication or pharmaceutical agent that you've used again and again, to get patients and your clients to try just a different medication that might be, and oftentimes is, the exact equivalent medication, costs you and the system a lot less, get great results.
So that's a way to make better use of the biosimilars that we have, but we don't have very many. To go back to the European comparison, they have approved far more of these drugs than we have in the US. Even a lot of the drugs that have technically been approved by the FDA in the US, the manufacturers have then signed legal agreements to not sell their drug, so it's not actually available to patients, even though it's approved. There just aren't many to choose from. So, what does Congress need to do, or what does the United States need to do further back to sort of try to boost this market a little bit so doctors actually have a choice?
Actually, a fair number of them have been approved by FDA, to be honest. And but to your point, the take-up has been terrible. So I think beyond just the price change, there's got to be a little more of a public relations campaign about the benefits. I think, as you pointed out, they're widely popular in Europe. I think they constitute 90% of the injectable marketplace there. It's a paltry amount in the United States of America. So I think a lot of it, Sam, is just going to be getting the word out there that these medications are available. And as you start to get the pickup, then I think FDA will start to prioritize even more of them for availability in the marketplace. FDA right now is a little understaffed, lots of obligations out there at this point in time. And I think they're doing a little triage within their own office as to which area are they going to put a lot of their manpower behind. So I think once we start getting some increased uptake, we can then encourage FDA to continue to approve more and more of these biosimilars, because there's quite a few out there right now.
And is this your bill, and you sort of spoke to this earlier, would increase the overall amount that Medicare pays for these drugs? Obviously, seniors pay a percentage of that cost themselves. Is this just an area where it's got to be a little bit more expensive now so it can be cheaper later?
I think that is accurate. Again, like I said, the increase is not a great amount, from 6% to 8% the price. So it's a little more of an increase, but not a lot. But it may be enough to make a difference in the provider space. I know that when we're working on my Energy and Commerce Committee, provider reimbursement changes of just a percentage point or two is a huge issue for doctors and hospitals. It can make or break the ability for them to keep their practices open. As you know, Medicare, Medicaid don't pay the same rates as commercial. And so that mix that a doctor takes into his office as far as patient load goes, really critical to whether or not they can make it or not. So I think the incentive to pick up these biosimilars would be greater if we just reimburse at a little higher rate for, I think our plan here is for the next, say, 5 years or so, see how this works. And hopefully, as frankly, docs become more comfortable with it, may not even have to do it going forward.
Is that enough time, do you think, for the incentive to sort of trickle back further into the chain? Fair
question. Fair question, Sam. I'm hoping, a lot of times we'll start some of these programs, and if it's a complete bust, we won't continue. If there's zero pickup, that would be a waste of money. But at the same time, it looks like we're getting some nascent interest, and then MedPAC or some of the other groups talk to us about, okay, hey, this is looking good. Please increase, or maybe got to change that number slightly. I think 5 years is probably a reasonable time frame for Congress to commit to that. If it's working, we can reauthorize, but let's not put that increased cost out there if there's no return on our investment.
Your proposal is bipartisan. Not a lot of bipartisanship in health policy at all, certainly not when it comes to drug prices. There are so many moving pieces right now. Democrats have a lot of ideas about prescription drugs.
Yes.
Can you just kind of give us what the latest lay of the land, where you think you have an opening, where maybe you don't? Where does all this stand right now?
I would say there's actually a fair amount of bipartisanship in this arena. We had the Wyden-Grassley bill from last Congress, came out of the Senate. Wasn't fully ripe for floor time, but spent some time trying to figure out what's a good bipartisan approach to moving forward if H.R. 3 is a bridge too far for a lot of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And on the House side, H.R. 19, which was a Republican-led initiative, but had a lot of bipartisan drug cost reduction elements into it. There's a group in Congress called the Problem Solvers Caucus. I actually started that group probably 10, almost 12 years ago now, out of some frustration about the partisanship here. And it's a group that's mature. There's 29 Democrats, 29 Republicans that meet regularly. We're the only bipartisan group that meets regularly in the House of Representatives. And so we've broken up into different task forces. I'm the nominal Democrat lead on health care and drug cost reduction policy. And we're meeting. We've been meeting now since this Congress has started. Our staffs have been working. What are the common elements that we've seen in the Wyden-Grassley bill and in the HR 19, and some new ideas coming from the industry itself? Interestingly enough, pharmaceutical companies seem to be stepping up at this point in time and willing to be part of the solution, as are some of the insurers and manufacturers. I think there's some opportunity. We're trying to play in this space. Reconciliation hangs over the head of probably everybody out there as a fairly draconian way to go after public policy. And if we come up with a bipartisan bill, I think it stands the test of time much better.
Do you think President Biden will be signing something on drug prices this year?
Hope so. Hope it'd be my bipartisan approach that I'm working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on. He's shown an interest, obviously, in the infrastructure piece that we're trying to figure out what the pay-fors are, but that's got bipartisan support. My problem solvers group started that discussion also, Sam. The Senate picked it up. We worked closely with the Senate, and the President agreed. And they've come to a resolution on at least the program elements. We got the pay-fors are always a little trickier, but the drug pricing bill that we're working on actually would pay for itself and leave a little extra at the end of the day. That is, if they don't steal it away in the infrastructure bill.
Fair enough. All right. Well, plenty to keep us all busy. And I know that's keeping you personally very busy. So thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to talk with us today. It was great to hear.
Appreciate your interest. A big issue of our time.
Thanks so much. And next, we have a View from the Top segment with my colleague, the Senior Vice President of Events and Creative Strategy at Axios, Kristen Burkle.
Thanks, Sam. I'd like to now bring in Tony Mauro, who is the President of Developed Markets at Beatrice. Welcome to Axios, Tony.
Thank you, Kristen. It's great to be here today.
Really looking forward to this worthy conversation. Biosimilars have been in the news a ton lately, especially related to costs. So I think we should just dive straight in. First things first, tell me about you and your company, Viatris.
Sure, absolutely. Viatris was a company formed in November 16th of 2020, and it was a company merging Upjohn, the legacy Upjohn business, and Mylan. I've been with Mylan 25 years prior to forming Viatris, and I'm so proud to be part of this new organization, really looking to empower people around the world to live healthier lives via access, leadership, and partnership. So just a tremendous opportunity to bring new products to market and help patients get access around the world.
And we're here today to talk about biosimilars. So we have a very smart audience, but they still might be a little bit confused by the difference between biologics and biosimilars. So break it down for us. In your words, what exactly are biosimilars?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, it's always helpful to kind of frame, the pharmaceutical spend in the U.S. And it will help you get a better idea of what I think the value of a biosimilar really will be to this healthcare industry. So in the U.S. today, we have approximately $500 billion in pharmaceutical spend. 20,000 marketed products make up the great majority of that spend in healthcare from a medicinal standpoint. Out of that spend, 45%, over $200 billion alone, are from biologic products. 300 marketed biologic products make up 45% of those products. So you can see the wonderful opportunity we have to bring affordability into the marketplace. And one of the critical areas to do that, matter of fact, I believe one of the biggest opportunities we have to drive both access and reduction in spend is by introducing biosimilars. And in its simplest form, what a biosimilar is an FDA-approved lower cost option to these biologic products that have no meaningfully different from a safety and efficacy perspective, FDA-approved lower cost option of those biologic products that make up 45% of the U.S. healthcare spend in medicine.
But there seem to be barriers, to utilization. So, what are the primary barriers that you are thinking about day in and day out?
Sure. Out of the 300 products we have in the U.S. that are biologics, the FDA has approved 30 biosimilars for 9 different products. And right now what we see is about, no more than 5 of those products have market shares greater than 20%. So what we see is an opportunity, and not shockingly, there are barriers, and there's barriers that really are about incentives, aligning incentives across stakeholders. And those critical stakeholders are first and foremost patients, physicians, and payers. Ensuring that those incentives are aligned in a way to ensure conversion to biosimilars to drive not just affordability, but the access to patients who aren't taking these medicines today. So we really do feel like if we get these incentives right, and we've seen this before in other parts of our industry, when the incentives are aligned appropriately from a physician, from an out-of-pocket cost, out of patients, from a patient perspective, and if the payers are saving money, the substitution will work. And I think there's a great opportunity to drive additional access and affordability of these biosimilar products.
And you mentioned getting the incentives right, but you also mentioned there are hurdles. So, like, what is the answer? What do you think needs to happen next?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a number of solutions. First and foremost, I think getting those incentives right from a prescription dispensing perspective, where doctors are administering biosimilars in their office and clinics, whether that's increasing the add-on reimbursement payments to physicians who are administering those products, and ensuring that they're getting better reimbursements for biosimilar products to drive utilization will be first and foremost. I think ensuring patient out-of-pocket expenses are at least at lowest forms for using biosimilars, depending on their insurance, whether it's a Medicare or whether it's commercial. I think ensuring our biosimilar products across the industry are available to these patients is critical, and at the lowest cost from an out-of-pocket perspective. These are critical steps in helping ensure patient access and greater conversion of biologics from a biosimilar perspective. And we've actually seen similar attributes. If you look back into the early 90s, the mid 90s, the generic drug industry in the US really had not accelerated its conversion because the incentives weren't aligned in the right way. And I think we've seen over the last 15 years or 20 years that generic utilization is now over 90% because the incentives were aligned appropriately for all the stakeholders. And once again, I'll say it over and over again. The patients have to win, the physicians have to win, and the payers have to win. Those three critical stakeholders will help drive greater utilization of biosimilars, greater affordability, and greater access for the U.S. healthcare system.
And you mentioned the FDA at the beginning of our conversation, but what is, in your opinion, the FDA's role in all of this?
I mean, the FDA plays a tremendously critical role in driving utilization and obviously development of biosimilar products. And to be fair, after the Biologic Price Competition Innovation Act of 2010, the FDA has done a lot of work working with manufacturers to make sure we have the proper guidance to get products developed, get products approved. They've done just amazing work ensuring the public understands what a biosimilar is and to kind of demystify it and make sure that they're the champion kind of for public trust. And I think there's more to do. To be fair, there's a lot more we can do as an industry and the FDA can do. And this, I think, is the next step, really focusing on interchangeability for biosimilar products, because I believe long-term, the key to biosimilar affordability and conversion will really focus on this interchangeability where a physician or a pharmacy or a hospital can substitute a product without, blocking from any other mechanisms within the insurance or payer community. So I think it's a huge opportunity to accelerate conversion, accelerate utilization of biosimilars, and really drive access and affordability across the healthcare industry.
It makes complete sense, and thank you for demystifying some of the concerns out there. One final question before I let you go: is there anything else on the horizon that's exciting for your new role at Beatrice, or something that you're thinking about day in and day out that you'd like to share with us?
Well, thank you. Every day I wake up and I look for opportunities, and I'm so thankful to be able to lead this developed markets team at Beatrice across North America and Europe. And honestly, from a biosimilar perspective, there's nothing that creates greater utilization than competition, rigor, creating the right incentives. And every day we're working with all the stakeholders I mentioned, whether it's patient groups, physicians, payers, regulatory bodies, policymakers, to ensure we can get greater utilization and ensure the alignment of incentives are adequate across the stakeholder communities so we can really drive this performance. And I know it's a great opportunity. It's one I'm thankful to be a part of. And I know we've got great results in the future across the industry. And Beatrice is just excited to be a part of it. So thank you for having me. And I really echo I hope this is a tremendous opportunity for the whole market to understand this opportunity we have.
Thank you, Tony, for this worthy conversation. Appreciate your time today. And going to pass it now over to my colleague, our healthcare reporter, Caitlin Owens.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm Caitlin Owens, the healthcare reporter here at Axios. Our final guest today is the CEO of the Carolina Blood and Cancer Care, Dr. Kashyap Patel. He's joining us from Rock Hill, South Carolina. Welcome, Dr. Patel.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, and thank you for allowing me to join and express my views today on the hot topic that actually is being debated everywhere.
Well, with that introduction to the topic, today we're talking about biosimilars. And from your perspective, it's no secret that specialty drugs, including oncology drugs, have been getting more and more expensive as time goes on and they become more advanced. What impact has this growth in the price of drugs had on patients, especially cancer patients?
Well, Caitlin, we all know that the treatment for the cancer is evolving in a very kind of fine and nice way, but also at the same time, the price takes its own toll on cancer patients. With increasing number of patients facing out-of-pocket costs, as well as patients retiring, it becomes hard for them to sustain the level of cancer care. So with the growth, innovation, and research also comes a toll that can lead to financial toxicity. And I think biosimilars would definitely help assimilate some of that kind of challenges that we face.
Right. And so biosimilars are relatively new to the healthcare world. How successful do you think this market has been?
Caitlin, thank you for that question. And this is something that I always want to share with the audience, that there's a mixed bag of feelings about the success of biosimilars. The promises are huge. If you look into the biosimilars adoption in Europe, they've done a phenomenal job of bringing biosimilars because some part of the system is kind of government controlled. But in the US, because of multiple free market economy, as well as the patent infringement issues, as well as the provider uptake, the complexities of the profitability between the PBMs, the hospital systems, the oncology, particularly community oncologists like us, have adapted biosimilars extremely well. And then in the value-based care, we've seen a huge potential saving that has been achieved. But oncologists, particularly community oncologists like us, make a very small fragment of the whole supply chain. Biologics are used in multiple disease types, beginning from the cancer, the other blood disorders, and multiple other issues of specialties. And we form a very small segment, but I'm proud to say that we've adapted it so well, and we've seen a success in reducing the out-of-pocket cost, reducing on the total cost of care for our beneficiaries that we serve.
And what are some of the remaining obstacles to further strengthen this market?
So the main obstacles I've seen is first of all, education. So even now, provider education is not as optimal as it should be. If you look into anything outside community oncology, look at the rheumatology, the gastroenterology, the ophthalmology, where the biosimilars are available, there's very little uptake by the providers, and that's simply because the knowledge dissemination has been lacking behind. That's one. The formulary issue is a huge one, and this is what frustrates me all the time. You'll keep hearing me talking about the PBMs. And I can never imagine or fathom the complexity where you have a less expensive alternative approved by FDA available in the market, and yet some of the PBMs recommend to their plans that they should use much higher cost drug to in place of biosimilar, which is surprising. The third thing is that the supply chain issue. So again, contracting and everything else becomes a problem. the coverage policies. And last thing I want to say is the hospital adoption. So as much as the community clinics have absolutely absorbed the biosimilars in a formulary at every possible level, there's a lack of adoption, and that's because of the incentives that actually makes the institutions and large health systems use more expensive option because of the rebates and back-end discounts. And so, end of the day, patient suffers. If you look into the out-of-pocket cost implications, 19% beneficiaries in America have do not have secondary insurance who are Medicare beneficiaries. And for them, the out-of-pocket cost would vary between $2,500 to $15,000, which is almost like what they make, some of them in our region. So the benefits are not reaching to the population that we need to serve most. Even when you look at the commercial insurance segment, Caitlin, the co-insurance varies from almost 23% to 56% depending on the plan. So the higher the cost of the drug, the higher the out-of-pocket cost. So system is not designed to look at the ultimate beneficiary, which is the patient.
Right. And something interesting that you and I had in a previous conversation we touched on is that you said that biosimilars have actually been more successful in the oncology sector than in other disease areas. Why is that?
I think oncologists have actually adapted the value-based care model, particularly when you look into the oncology care model, where we are actually working with the CMS, CMMI to find less expensive options to reduce the cost of care. And it makes sense because, again, when I see my cancer patients struggling even to pay for the gas, I have to make sure that I look after every possible alternative to help them. I'm not saying that my colleagues are not really kind of conscientious of that, but they have not been appropriately educated about the potential benefits of reducing the out-of-pocket cost as well as total cost of care. At the end of the day, I and my colleagues see ourselves as the trustees and the stewards of the society for the pocketbook. And the more we look at cognizantly about what can we do collectively as a system, the better we are off. So I think appropriate education and incentives to the other specialists will definitely help them make aware of that. And again, I want to come back to the hospitals and health system because if you look at the Bernstein report that was published about a few months back or a few weeks back, it shows that the biosimilar adoption in the hospital, particularly 340B, has been very minimal. And that disappoints me, even in the oncology space.
Mm-hmm. And critics of the biosimilar market say that even if it's highly successful, because of the nature of how complex these drugs are, it will never be enough to get down the price of drugs low enough, and that there must be direct price intervention. What do you say to critics of this nature?
Well, you look at the success in the oncology care model. For my particular small practice, when I look at my drug budget, I'll be able to reduce the total cost of biologics spend in my office by about 35%. And when you look at 35% saving, when you look into the Medicare beneficiary who does not have a secondary insurance, Medigap insurance, that saving could be as much as about $8,000 to $10,000 when I translate all the drugs that are replaced with biosimilars. So I want to tell all the critics that you look at that the most weakest and the poorest segment of the society, and if we can make a change into their life, that's what matters most. People on this call or people who listen to us, they may not have to worry too much about saving $200 a month, but the beneficiary who sustains on $1,200 a month, $200 a month saving could become about 20% of its total savings. So that is first thing. We forget that there's a human being at the end of the equation. When the critics say we don't save money, if you save 35% on a drug, which is what biosimilars have done, that's a huge saving both for the system as well as for the patients.
Right. And one way to get costs down, obviously, is to have less cancer. Another thing that you mentioned was the disparities you've noticed in who gets preventative care for cancer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh my God, I need a whole hour to talk about it, but we'll have a separate segment on that. Cancer health disparities, particularly we got to know about it with the COVID-19. And American Association of Cancer Research recently published a whole scathing report where they say that we could save 34% of cancer patients' lives if we did not have disparities, which is a multifactorial challenge we are beginning from social determinants of health to access to care, to access to screening, to access to testing. And all of these factors together lead to 34% possible higher mortality. Plus, if we intervene right ahead of the time, we could save downstream expense. For example, stage 1 breast cancer patient could be treated with $10,000 versus stage 4 cancer patient would need about $500,000. And another part of the ACR report says that we could have saved $230 billion in 3 years if we address disparities in the right way. So I'm very passionate about it. And I'll send you tons of literature that will be good tranquilizing material for you to sleep at night.
And we're running out of time, Dr. Patel, but we like to end on one fun thing. So give us a quick summary of the COVID activity that you told me that you picked up.
Awesome. So when everything shut down, I had nothing else to do after I went back from work to home. So I would start walking about 2 miles. And one day I was walking in a nearby strip mall, and I saw actually one of the girls. She was the hostess. She said, "Hey, Dr. Patel, I haven't seen you for a while. We are all lonely here." She was very depressed. And I said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "We are just serving the takeouts from the food restaurant." So I said, "Can I sit here?" She pulled a chair. She said, "I cannot let you in, but if you can sit outside, you can sit there." So I sat out there and I said, "Well, would you be able to serve me a glass of wine?" She said, "I cannot serve in a regular glass, but if you're willing to take it in a plastic cup, I'll do that." So I had a glass of wine and I thought, these people need so much of the emotional and moral support. So I went back to my home and I got together with 15 or 20 of my friends who live in a country club. And I said, "Why don't we start a club called Walk for Wine?" So I inspired so many of my colleagues, and we would go there on the regular scheduled day, Wednesday, Tuesday, and Friday. We would sit out just on the street and we all would take a plastic cup of wine. And everyone from my country club got so excited and said, "Yeah, we should continue to support local people." So I would take my 4-mile walk. I could burn my calories so that I can justify a couple of glasses of wine. And that probably turned out to be best. And we even made a Walk for Wine shirts as well that I sent you a copy of.
Walk for Wine. Gotta love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel.
Of course. Thank you. I look forward to working with you on the cancer disparities as well at some stage.
And thank all of you for joining us for another Axios event that made us all smarter, faster. Thank you to Beatrice, our sponsor, for making this event today possible. And for more information or to sign up for Axios Vitals, our daily healthcare newsletter, you can go to axios.com/newsletters or visit the Axios app. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you on axios.com.